It's a land born of fiery explosions and violent collisions in the earth below. A land ruled over by icy giants whose shifting crevasses can swallow people whole. This is Alaska, a land of fire and ice. It's here where climbers attempt the summit of the highest, coldest peak on the continent, and where the most powerful volcanic eruption of the 20th century turned a lush valley into this eerie moonscape. Everything here is bigger, tougher, and more extreme. For centuries, Alaska has beckoned to fortune hunters and thrill seekers alike. From Russian invaders on the hunt for the fur of our ocean's smallest mammals, to prospectors hoping to strike it rich in hard rock mines full of copper and gold. Here, thousands come every year to battle exhaustion and haul in the riches of the sea, while others come to scramble up one high, rocky peak to test their mettle against mountain, sometimes just for the sheer fun of it. Aerial Alaska soars over remote corners of this stunning Arctic land. From its highest ice fields to the salmon-filled streams of an island where the world's largest brown bears come to feast. But in the end, its wildest places may be its city streets. All this in America's last frontier, Alaska. From a tiny airstrip in the town of Talkeetna, a bush plane lifts off into Alaska's wide-open sky. On board is a team of mountaineers preparing to tackle one of the most difficult climbs in America, in one of the coldest mountain ranges on the continent. At the controls of this single-engine Beaver is veteran pilot David Lee. He belongs to a family of legendary bush pilots who began flying in the Alaska wilderness back in 1932. Today, his 60-mile flight will carry the climbers up into the snowy peaks of Denali National Park. Alaska is full of forbidding landscapes that have been forged with fire and are ruled by ice. Landscapes that have challenged even the most skilled bush pilots, like David, for nearly a century. But today, the rough terrain below isn't the only danger. A thick cloud layer is dropping quickly, and David's plane is starting to get knocked around by high winds. The trick is to fly under the clouds, but not get pushed too far down so he becomes trapped in valleys between the mountains and not have enough room to turn or a place to land. Inside, the climbing team is eager to get a glimpse of their quarry, the king of Alaska peaks, Mount McKinley. When Russians established the first European settlement in Alaska at the end of the 18th century, they called this peak Bolshaya Gora, or the Great Mountain. But in 1896, a prospector named it Mount McKinley. Today, most know it simply as Denali, which means the Great One in the Koyukon language of Alaska's native Athabaskan people. This indigenous tribe lived within sight of the mountain for thousands of years and were the first to be awed by its looming presence. And there's a very good reason why they were. Denali is the tallest mountain in North America. Its summit is so high it remains hidden under clouds most of the year. But when those clouds clear, locals announce the mountain is out. Denali is located in the south-central part of the state, between the cities of Anchorage and Fairbanks. It lies on the massive Alaska Range that curves for 600 miles, like a giant backbone. Among the highest peaks of this range are Mount Hunter at 14,573 feet and Mount Foraker at 17,400. Towering over them all is Denali, rising 20,322 feet, the king of the range. The mountains of the Alaska Range are so tall and cold, they make their own harsh weather year-round. When moist air flows north from the Gulf of Alaska, it gets trapped high in these peaks. With nowhere to go, the clouds that fill these valleys freeze, dumping snow on everything below. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the snow turns into giant rivers of ice that then make their way down and out of the mountains in the form of glaciers. Today, more than 400 glaciers drape Denali National Park alone. Together, they cover 1/6 of the entire park. And the longest of them all is this one, the Kahiltna. It starts its long descent at just over 10,000 feet and then snakes south for 44 miles. From high above, this glacier looks like a solid mass. But skim its surface, and you quickly see that it's made up of deep crevasses. Icy chasms, many of which could easily swallow a plane whole. Above, the clouds are forcing David Lee to drop down closer to the ice. Here, mountains can appear suddenly from nowhere, out of the mist. That's why David is following the Kahiltna. It offers a wide and safer route up to base camp. And while this plane may be speeding up the glacier at 130 miles an hour, the Kahiltna itself is moving the other direction at a snail's pace, roughly 800 feet a year. But its destructive power is awesome. It's hard to grasp a sense of the sheer force of Denali's glaciers until you soar across its snowy peaks and come here to a place known as the Great Gorge. This is one of the deepest canyons on Earth, created by the action of the Ruth Glacier, grinding away at solid rock for millions of years. This glacier has proven so powerful, it's already chewed its way through these mile-high walls of granite. But evidence of the real power of the Ruth lies hidden under the ice. This glacier is 3,800 feet thick. That's more than 2/3 of a mile. If it all melted away, you'd be looking into an abyss deeper than the Grand Canyon. One reason there's so much ice in the Ruth is because it's actually the product of multiple glaciers merging in this gorge and combining their forces. Fly down the center, and you discover a black band that looks like a dead ringer for the solid no passing line on a highway. This striking feature is created when two glaciers merge, and the rocks and soil that each churned up at their edges meet in the middle. Finally, David Lee and his climbers are approaching the Denali base camp at 7,000 feet. The towering peaks dwarf the tiny tents and ant-like people below. This is one of the most unique landing strips in the world, a blanket of snow on top of shifting crevasses. The only way to land here is to do it on special retractable skis that flip out underneath the tires. But even with this special gear, glacier landings can be treacherous. In this all-white landscape, even experienced pilots can lose a sense of how high they are off the snow. But David's landed here hundreds of times and touches down smoothly with his passengers safe and sound. Now comes the most dangerous part of their journey, getting to the top of Mount McKinley. From base camp, the summit is another 13,000 vertical feet, or 2.5 miles higher. Each climber has to carry 2 to 3 weeks of supplies. They tackle the mountain in small groups, all tied together for safety. If one falls into a crevasse, the others can help pull him or her out. But one day before this footage was shot in 2012, a team of 5 Japanese climbers was swept away in a large avalanche here on the West Buttress route. Only one of them survived, managing to pull himself more than 60 feet out of a crevasse, alone, badly frostbitten. Even after a thorough search, the bodies of his 4 friends were never found. For most climbers, the greatest threat isn't avalanches, but frigid weather. Denali is one of the coldest mountains on Earth, since it lies so close to the Arctic Circle. Temperatures can plunge to minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit in winter and minus 40 in summer. Fast-moving storms can hit at any time, packing a lethal mix of snow, ice, and winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Climbing parties are often pinned down for days in their tents. As a result, only half of those who attempt Denali ever make it to the summit, about 500 climbers each year. But for those few that succeed, the thrill of reaching this cold, snowy spot, the very top of the North American continent, is immense. And even today, Denali is still growing higher by 0.5 millimeter every year. That's because the Alaska Range has been created by what's called uplift, a process that happens when 2 of the Earth's giant tectonic plates collide. Here in Alaska, as the Pacific Plate dove under the North American Plate, it pushed it upward, lifting Denali and other peaks in the range onto their lofty thrones, a process that's taken some 60 million years so far. Denali deserves its reputation as an ice king, but many of Alaska's most dramatic peaks are known not for their ice, but for their fiery cores instead. There are 50 active volcanoes in Alaska, and 2 of them blow their top every year. This puts many Alaskans on a constant vigil for the next eruption, including those who live here in the coastal town of Sitka on the state's southeastern panhandle. Just across the bay stands Mount Edgecombe, a now dormant volcano. On April 1st, 1974, when residents of Sitka saw black smoke pouring from the volcano, they panicked, assuming Edgecombe was rumbling to life. Little did they know, it was an April Fool's joke done by a local prankster. He'd hauled 70 tires into the crater and set them on fire. Funny for some, but not for others. Especially those who lived through the most powerful volcanic eruption of the 20th century, which happened right here, in Alaska's Valley of 10,000 Smokes. A group of hikers is finishing a 12-mile trek. They've come for a chance to experience one of the most amazing landscapes in Alaska, if not the world. These primitive cabins where they'll stay were first built by the University of Alaska Geophysical Institute as a research station to study the aftermath of the biggest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. It happened here in the early summer of 1912. In late May, a series of earthquakes started to rattle this once lush valley. The native Alaskan people who had lived here for hundreds of years sensed something was terribly wrong. Gathering their belongings, they fled, just in time. On June 6th, a volcano named Novarupta suddenly exploded with cataclysmic force, a force 10 times greater than that of the Mount St. Helens eruption of 1980. Great geysers of magma shot into the sky. Rivers of superheated lava flowed into the valley. The sheer volume of what was ejected from Novarupta is still mind-boggling. 15 cubic kilometers of magma alone. Rivers of superheated gas and ash raced into this valley 12 miles away, flattening lush forests and vaporizing trees, transforming it into the wide, desolate plain it is today. A native village called Savanoski was abandoned forever. The National Park Service later reported that residents on nearby Kodiak Island couldn't even see their own lanterns when held at arm's length. Days of complete darkness followed. In the end, what came out of Novarupta blanketed 40 square miles, with deposits 700 feet thick in some places. When it was over, all that was left of the source of the eruption was this black dome of lava, which was responsible for bringing the devastation to an end. As the eruption slowed, lava bubbled and pooled, plugging its own vent, quieting the volcano. 4 years passed before researchers finally reached the site. When they did in 1916, they found a landscape of steaming vents, leading them to call it the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Today, it's a place full of bizarrely beautiful sights, like this hidden river that's carved its way deep into the valley floor. To preserve the site of Novarupta and the remarkable landscape created by its searing pyroclastic flows, Congress voted in 1918 to protect the area. The Valley of 10,000 Smokes is now part of the much larger Katmai National Park, which covers more than 7,000 square miles of Alaska wilderness. Today, high-tech devices throughout the valley listen for strange vibrations that might signal that Novarupta is rumbling back to life. No one knows when, but one day in the future, this valley will explode in smoke and flame again. Volcanoes may have blown the tops off many Alaskan peaks, but most are just weathered by time and the seasons. And while winter may lock many mountain peaks in a casing of snow and ice, it doesn't stop Alaskans from getting out into the wild, even into some of the state's most remote places. It's a picture-perfect day here in the Talkeetna Mountains. The slopes are covered in deep powder, the kind of conditions skiers dream of. The only hitch is there's no chairlift, gondola, or even a road for many miles around. But that didn't stop these self-reliant Alaskans from stepping out for a breath of fresh air 6,000 feet up a wilderness peak. In Alaska, even just going for a ski can require a hefty mountain trek. So much of this state's rugged terrain is remote and impassable that very few roads are built here. There are just 5,000 miles of paved roads in the entire state, about 1,000 miles less than there are in New York City alone. Many Alaska towns and villages are so remote, there's no road into them at all. Take the fishing town of Cordova. There are only 2 ways to get here, and car is not one of them. You can either get here by sea or by plane. These aircraft are made for residents of towns like Cordova, where a nearby lake provides a convenient landing strip. Being able to pull off landings like this one comes in handy in a land with thousands of miles of ocean coastline and over 3 million lakes and ponds. For thousands of years, Alaska natives plied these coastal waters in skin kayaks, dugouts, and bark-covered canoes. With these human-powered watercraft, they traveled long distances across open ocean and down rivers on hunting trips, or hopped from island to island to visit and trade with neighboring villages. Today, many of those same journeys are done in minutes with airplanes, and is one reason that Alaska has more registered pilots than any other state. When these pilots come into the big city of Anchorage to land, chances are they'll be touching down on water, here, at the Lake Hood Seaplane Base, the busiest seaplane airport in the world. Lake Hood has 3 water runways and its own control tower, which handles about 200 takeoffs and landings a day. As for parking, that's what these 5 artificial channels are for. They're called the 5 Fingers. Pilots secure their planes in these cozy miniature harbors. When they take off, chances are they're heading out to one of the state's remote communities to haul in everything from people to medicine to food staples, including fresh vegetables and fruit. That's because Alaska has to import more than 95% of its food. And there's a very good explanation for why they do. Almost 80% of Alaska is covered by permafrost. When summer arrives, valleys may be green on the surface, but dig just a few feet down, and you'll hit hard, frozen soil. This permafrost makes farming risky, which is why there are just a few hundred farmers in the entire state today. And if there's anywhere that could be called Alaska's breadbasket, it's here, the Mat-Su Valley. Named after the Matanuska and Susitna rivers that flow across the valley floor, the Mat-Su became farmland thanks to a bold social experiment conducted after the Great Depression. In 1935, more than 200 poor farm families from the upper Midwest were relocated to this valley by the U.S. government. They were given up to 80 acres apiece and the chance to start over on the Alaska frontier. The settlers worked hard, building barns and plowing their fields, hoping the harsh conditions wouldn't destroy their crops. But in the end, Alaska's long, cold winters and short growing seasons were too much to take. Within 5 years, half had given up and headed back south. But a few stayed on and made a go of it. Today, dozens of farms dot the Mat-Su, evidence of how some hardy Alaskans managed to battle the odds and ice to survive. In fact, the Mat-Su Valley has produced some of the largest vegetables on Earth, including one 18-pound carrot and a 49-pound celery. But vegetables aren't the only things that grow to monster proportions this far north. Alaska is also home to the largest and longest glacier in all of North America. Each spring, winter-weary Alaskans eagerly await this sight: the ice breaking up on the state's frozen rivers. In one town, there's even a big cash lottery to guess the exact time of spring ice out. While rivers like this one enjoy a brief thaw each summer, huge swaths of Alaska are under permanent icy lockdown, no matter what the season. Alaska boasts more than 100,000 glaciers. They cover 5% of the state, nearly 30,000 square miles, an area larger than West Virginia. Alaska's glaciers come in many varieties. Most are inland glaciers, like those on Denali, but there are many near the coast that flow right into the sea. 20 of these tidewater glaciers reside here in Prince William Sound, the highest concentration of them in the world. The granddaddy of all tidewater glaciers is the Bering, the largest and longest glacier in North America. Looking up at it from its end, the Bering is so wide, it barely fits in the frame. From one side to the other, it's a mind-boggling 10 miles wide. The source of this mighty glacier lies here, high in the Wrangell and St. Elias Mountains, the tallest coastal mountains in the world. Here in what's called the Bagley Icefield, heavy winter snows have accumulated over eons, filling up the high plateau like a giant bathtub. More than half a mile thick in places, the vast ice sheet is 120 miles long and 6 miles wide. On the surface, splashes of brilliant color break up the endless white. Spots of melting snow have created ponds and channels that refreeze into stunning veins of blue ice. The Bagley Icefield feeds ice into the top of the Bering Glacier, where it begins to wind downhill towards the coast. But the Bering isn't the only glacier to feed off this ice field. The Bagley is so massive that it also nourishes dozens of smaller glaciers that flow out of the range and into the valleys below. Global warming is taking a big bite out of Alaska's glaciers. With temperatures here rising twice as fast as those in the lower 48, many of the state's glaciers are beating a hasty retreat. Scientists estimate that the Bering alone has lost about 7.5 miles of ice since 1900. All that extra melting produces lots of water. The Bering releases 6.5 trillion gallons of water into the Gulf of Alaska each year. That's twice the volume of water in the entire Colorado River. Scientists are concerned that the increasing meltwater could change ocean currents out in the Gulf. But glacial meltwater also creates some of Alaska's most fantastical landscapes, like this one, the Copper River Delta. Here, the combined flow from 6 glacial rivers slows to a trickle as it fans out across the coastal plain. Through this crazy quilt of mudflats and marsh, streams created by melted ice snake their way to the sea. The meltwater deposits thousands of tons of nutrient-rich silt into the delta each year, building mudflats 600 feet deep. The delta is also home to the largest continuous stretch of wetlands on the Pacific coast. This amazing ecosystem supports millions of birds and fish, including spawning grounds for the prized Copper River salmon. At the mouth of the river is the wild shoreline that greeted the earliest Russian explorers, led by Captain Vitus Bering when they first stepped ashore nearby in 1741. Not long afterwards, Bering's ship wrecked, and most of his crew perished. But the few who made it back home reported excitedly that Alaska was teeming with a creature that still calls these frigid waters home: sea otters. They are the smallest mammals in the ocean and can survive in freezing waters thanks to their layers of thick fur. Sea otters have up to 1 million hairs per square inch of skin, which means their skin itself never gets wet. But their amazing fur almost led to their extinction, since the sea otter's remarkable pelts were highly valued in Europe in the 18th century. Soon, Russian fur traders began showing up on the rocky shores of a place known today as Kodiak Island. At the time, Kodiak was already home to a native Alaskan people called the Alutiiq, who made their living from the sea and from edible plants and berries found on the island's emerald slopes. As more and more Russian traders landed and tried to take the island's natural riches, Alutiiq warriors fought back. And so, finally, in 1784, the Russians decided to take Kodiak once and for all by force. Legend has it that the Alutiiq took shelter on a tiny island just off the coast called Refuge Rock, a natural fortress protected by cliffs 10 stories high. It was a hard spot to attack from the sea, and initially, the tribe succeeded in repelling the invaders. But the Russians weren't willing to give up. They sailed into this cove behind Refuge Rock and landed on Kodiak without detection, armed with guns and cannon. They then waited for low tide when a land bridge emerged, which they used to storm Refuge Rock from behind, surprising the Alutiiq. But the real tragedy was what happened next. Many, including women and children, threw themselves off these cliffs, preferring death to capture. The Russian successful defeat of the Aleutic here has been considered a major turning point that allowed Russia to colonize Alaska. Refuge Rock is a sacred place for the Aleutic people, many of whom still live on Kodiak Island, here in the fishing village of Old Harbor. Mending fishing nets is part of daily life here, just as it has been to native Alaskan fishermen for centuries. Most Aleutic today are Russian Orthodox. The distinctive onion domes of the faith's churches still rise above many communities across coastal Alaska. And today, Kodiak Island is best known not for sea otters, but for another much bigger creature, the Kodiak brown bear. They have been separated from their mainland cousins for more than 10,000 years and have grown to become the largest subspecies of brown bear on Earth. This male, known as a boar, could weigh upwards of 1,500 pounds, 3/4 of a ton. After a long winter in their dens, these bears make for their local watering hole, like this one on Dog Salmon Creek, for a summertime feast. The specialty here is fresh wild salmon. In summer, this creek, like hundreds of others in Alaska, teems with large fish swimming upstream from the ocean to spawn. It's the only time that these normally solitary brown bears gather in large numbers to share a feast. Their densely packed fur coat enables them to stand in freezing cold meltwater for an hour or more as they wait for the right moment to strike. But most of the time, their patience is rewarded with nothing more than near misses. On a good day, though, a bear can consume 100 pounds of tasty, calorie-packed salmon. When they catch one, they go right for the fatty stomach, brain, and eggs, and often leave the rest untouched. But come June, bears aren't the only ones trying to spot salmon in Alaska. Here on the Naknek River, an employee of the Alaskan Department of Fish and Game is carefully counting how many salmon are swimming upstream. It's the job of Alaska Fish and Game to ensure enough salmon can reproduce each year to keep the population a healthy size. With data streaming in from many different counting stations, the agency can see when and where the fish are returning. When there are adequate numbers in any one place, the agency opens that area to fishing. That's when the fishing boats roar to life. Alaska's sockeye salmon season is short, just a couple of weeks. Every June, thousands of fishermen descend on the tiny port town of Naknek. They come to fish on Bristol Bay, home to the world's largest salmon run. In 2013, 20 million sockeye salmon passed through this one Alaskan bay on their way to breed and spawn in the rivers where they were hatched. This year, like every year, the competition is fierce. There are more than 2,000 fishing boats from all over Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. Crews spool out the gill nets, hoping to hit a sweet spot where lots of fish will pass. From above, it's a slow-motion ballet of steel hulls and nylon nets. The reason for all this competition is that there's big money at stake here for the fishermen. $165 million in 2012 alone. A crew member could earn $10,000 for a few weeks' work, while the boat owner might haul in 5 times that amount. On the water, it's a go-for-broke fishing frenzy. The captain's jockey for position, fighting the fast tides and other boats that try to cut them off. As the heavy nets are hauled in, the crew picks fish out as fast as they can. On a single day, this one boat could bring in a whopping 6 tons of fish. When the fishing period is declared over, the boats must pull in their nets or risk a big fine. Then, they sidle up to these big tenders where the crews offload the catch and calculate their payday. This short salmon season is one intense fishing marathon. But it's not Alaska's only extreme sport. Looking down on Alaska from above, it's easy to see why this is the land of fire and ice. Thousands of mountains blanket this state, including 16 of America's 20 tallest peaks. Here on Resurrection Bay, the 2,600 residents of Seward live in the cold shadow of Mount Marathon, which rises 4,400 feet straight up out of the sea. Gluttons for punishment, the locals have made testing themselves against the mountain into a tortuous sporting event. The Mount Marathon Race, which has been held here since 1915. Each 4th of July, in separate races for women and men, runners compete to get to the summit and back down again, a 3-mile round trip. This year, 305 women have come from across Alaska to compete. Leaving town, their first half-mile is nice and flat. But after that, it's straight uphill, which means the climbers have to jockey for position on Mount Marathon's muddy, slippery slopes. Above tree line, a runner named Holly Brooks from Anchorage breaks from the pack and takes the lead. It's so steep she can hardly move faster than a walk. There's no one path up this mountain, so Holly has to pick her way across a field of loose rock as she tries to maintain her lead. 100 yards below, her competitors try to close the gap. A long line of pursuers follows. Some even use their hands to pull themselves up the mountain's steep flank. According to local folklore, this spectacle of suffering began as a bar wager back in 1907, when a local prospector bet another he could scale the mountain and return in under an hour. He lost and had to buy drinks for the crowd. Every year, Mount Marathon becomes a mountain of misery for an unlucky few who break bones and bloody limbs in falls, or worse. Later this same afternoon, a 65-year-old male runner disappeared on the mountain after summiting. Despite an extensive search, his body was never found. Reaching the summit, Holly Brooks is still in the lead and doesn't pause for a breath or the breathtaking view. She's halfway home and heads downhill for the final push. This race is all about getting up and down the mountain as fast as possible, and it doesn't matter how you do it. If she avoids falling on the loose rocks, the mile-long descent will take Holly just a few minutes. And then there's a final sprint to the finish back in town. The top contenders finish in well under an hour. A dashing feat of woman against mountain. Today, extreme athletes risk their lives scaling Alaska's high peaks just for the fun of it. But in earlier times, thousands came to clamber up Alaska's mountains in a search for buried treasure. Many of those hopeful prospectors arrived here at the port town of Valdez, nestled between Prince William Sound and the Chugach Mountains. Valdez started as a landing site and camp for miners arriving by ship during the Alaska Gold Rush in 1897. Steamship companies promoted this spot as the start of the Valdez Glacier Trail, a direct route to what they promised were rich, untapped gold fields in the Alaska interior. 4,000 green prospectors set out up this glacier, hauling 200-pound sleds by hand. The route was a nightmare. Men disappeared into crevasses, went snowblind, and struggled up slopes that were twice as steep as promised. Eventually, the prospectors realized that they had been conned. The Valdez Glacier Trail was a hoax, perpetrated to sell tickets to Alaska. Most made it out alive a year later, but many a man found an icy grave in the Valdez Glacier. Soaring high across the Alaskan wilderness, it's easy to see why this land is called the last frontier. But every winter, one of the wildest places in the state happens to be right here in Anchorage, on one of its city streets. A 180 miles up frigid Cook Inlet from the Gulf of Alaska, slabs of sea ice are piling up at the edge of Anchorage, the largest city in the land of fire and ice. Like the giant vegetables of the fertile Matsu Valley, located just 40 miles north, Anchorage is a real fast grower. In just 100 years, Anchorage has been transformed from a few canvas tents into this bustling city of 300,000. That's almost half the population of the entire state, corralled into a single broad valley at the foot of the rugged Chugach Mountains. While the deep, dark freeze of an Alaska winter is enough to send grizzlies running for cover in a long sleep, the business end of Anchorage stays awake and moving 24/7. Here in the city's deep water port, giant steel pods stuffed with tons of consumer goods are being offloaded from this 400-foot-long container ship just in from Seattle. With peaks like this in the backyard, it's easy to rise above it all in Anchorage. City dwellers and visitors flock to these trails up nearby Flat Top Mountain. 3,500 feet high, Flat Top is often called the most climbed mountain in Alaska, and it's easy to see why. The walk up to the summit is only 1.5 miles long. But on knife-edge ridges like this, little Flat Top can feel like the high Alps. From the summit, the sights are panoramic. All of Anchorage stretches out far below, along with what seems like much of the rest of Alaska, too. A major city of hundreds of thousands and an epic wilderness of millions of acres, all in the same sweeping view. But Alaskans aren't just fair weather outdoor friends. Come winter, when daylight throttles back to just 5.5 hours a day, the streets of Anchorage are transformed into a winter sports playground. The first step is turning the ice from foe to fun. Running 13 blocks along the edge of downtown Anchorage, Delaney Park is a favorite spot for getting out without ever leaving the city. Called Park Strip by the locals, it was built into the original city plans back in 1917. Used originally as a fire break to protect the town in wildfire season, the park also did double duty as the city's first airstrip. Today, the only things flying here are the pucks in the busy outdoor hockey rink. In winter, temperatures in Anchorage can drop to 30 below zero. On bitter cold days, there are apt to be as many dogs doing laps in the park as there are joggers. In Alaska, the weak winter sun never gets far above the horizon, but the low-angle light can throw some dramatic shadows, turning these well-mannered sled dogs into what looks like a pack of wild wolves. The bright spot of every Anchorage winter is a festival known as the Fur Rondi, short for the Fur Rendezvous. For 10 days beginning in late February, thousands of Alaskans converge on the snowy streets of Anchorage to get out, let loose, and thumb their noses at winter. The Fur Rondi began in 1935 to celebrate the return of trappers and miners to town after a winter of lonely work out in the bush. The strangest event has to be a spectacle called the running of the reindeer. In this frosty version of the bulls of Pamplona, Spain, 15 impressively antlered reindeer, also known as caribou, have been recruited for action. Here on 4th Avenue, the running surface has been prepped with tons of snow, and hundreds of enthusiastic participants have prepared by dressing in elaborate costumes, or practically nothing at all. The goal is to survive the mad dash without being gored or frostbitten, all in front of a crowd of 10,000 spectators. While certainly zany, the running of the reindeer does reflect something true about the spirit of winter here in Anchorage. The way the wild things start on one side and the people on another, and how they come to run together in the land of fire and ice.